The coffee was still too hot, but David Mitchell lifted the mug anyway, craving the bitter jolt that might sharpen the edges of a morning already fraying at 6:43. 15 minutes before the alarm would sound, 17, before Sophie's bare feet would slap against the hallway floor, seeking him out with the gravitational certainty of a moon to its planet. He stared at the water stain on the ceiling, at a Rorschach blot that resembled Italy, if Italy had been drawn by someone who'd never seen a map and cycled through the day's landmines. Sophie's lunch. Turkey on wheat crusts removed because she'd stage a lunchroom protest otherwise. Apple slices dunked in peanut butter, the name brand kind she could distinguish from generic by taste alone, a skill both impressive and financially ruinous. The juice boxes with cartoon dolphins, not the store brand penguins. The Henderson Report. 43 slides due on Victoria Cross's desk by 9, every decimal point verified 3 times because Victoria's tolerance for error hovered somewhere between 0 and nuclear winter. The car. That check engine light had been glowing amber for 16 days now, a small son of dread on his dashboard. The mechanic had quoted $800, possibly $1,000, if the catalytic converter had given up the ghost. David had $47 until Friday's direct deposit hit his account at midnight. 3 years. 3 years of this high-wire act where one misstep meant falling, and falling meant losing everything: the roof Sophie's school, the health insurance that covered her seasonal allergies, and the EpiPen he prayed they'd never need. 3 years since Sarah had left that note on the kitchen counter, 4 words that had detonated his life. I can't do this. Her wedding ring beside it, catching the morning light like an accusation. David pushed himself out of bed before the thought could metastasize. His feet found the cold hardwood heat, stayed off until 7 to shave $20 from the vinyl bill, and he moved through the small house with the efficiency of someone who'd mapped every squeaky floorboard. The bathroom mirror showed a man who looked 45 but claimed 38 on his driver's license. Dark circles carved beneath eyes that had forgotten sustained sleep sometime around Sophie's 2nd birthday. A faded Seahawks shirt from college coffee stained near the collar in a constellation he had stopped trying to bleach out. His phone vibrated on the sink's edge. Not the alarm. A text message. From Victoria. David's stomach performed its practiced clench muscle memory from 3 years of working for a woman whose expectations could crush diamonds into dust. Victoria Cross didn't text before 7. She didn't text at all, preferring the surgical precision of phone calls or emails with subject lines that read like indictments, urgent, or review immediately, or once memorably, explain this disaster. The message was terse: need you in early today. 7 a.m. David checked the time. 6:45. He had 75 minutes to execute a morning routine calibrated to the minute wake Sophie at 6:58, coax her into clothes that didn't violate the school dress code, while still allowing her to feel like a princess, negotiate breakfast, pancakes with a smiley face, or she'd weaponize hunger all morning. Drive 12 miles through Seattle traffic to Maple Leaf Elementary, then cross the city to Crosstech's downtown tower. 75 minutes to do the impossible. He was composing a response when Sophie appeared in the doorway, where Mr. Hoppy clutched to her chest like a talisman. The stuffed rabbit had seen better decades. One button eye hung at a drunken angle, gray fur worn to threads where Sophie's fingers had rubbed it smooth. She'd had him since she was 2, before Sarah left, back when their family had been a triad instead of this fragile dyad. Her voice carried the thickness of interrupted sleep. Daddy. David pocketed the phone and knelt, opening his arms. Sophie shuffled forward, still warm from her blankets, and pressed her face into his shoulder. She smelled like lavender shampoo and the vanilla nightlight that burned in her room to keep the monsters at bay. Hey, Bug, you're up early. I heard you walking around. Are you sad again? The question hit like a fist to the sternum. 6 years old, and she'd already learned to read his moods like weather patterns, watching for the storms that meant he was drowning under bills or fear, or the crushing responsibility of being the only parent standing between her and a world that didn't give a damn about single fathers with outdated cars and insufficient savings. Not sad, Bug, just thinking about work. You're always thinking about work. Because work is the only thing keeping us afloat, David didn't say. Because Victoria Cross pays me just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. And if I lose this job, we lose everything. Instead, how about pancakes? Her face transformed, exhaustion replaced by pure joy. With the smiley face, is there any other acceptable configuration? 20 minutes later, the kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon, and Sophie perched on her designated stool, the one with the wobbly leg David kept meaning to fix, watching him work with the intensity of a quality control inspector. The pancake had to be perfect. Oatmeal folded into the batter for nutrition, Sophie wouldn't accept any other way. Cooked to golden brown perfection. Strawberry slices for eyes, banana curve for a smile. Perfect flip, Daddy, Sophie clapped as the pancake arced through the air, rotating once before landing centered in the pan. Years of practice, kid. He slid the finished product onto her plate, added a microscopic drizzle of syrup, too much, and she'd vibrate through math class and set it before her. She attacked it with the single-minded focus of someone who believed breakfast was a competitive sport. Why are we rushing? Boss needs me early. Sophie chewed thoughtfully, syrup collecting at the corner of her mouth. Is your boss nice? David paused mid-coffee pour. How to explain Victoria Cross to a 6-year-old, the woman who'd built Cross-Tech Solutions from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire through sheer force of will and a complete inability to suffer fools? Who could silence a boardroom with a lifted eyebrow? Who scheduled bathroom breaks into her calendar and treated sleep like a quarterly event? Who had never in 3 years asked David a single question about his life beyond these walls? She's professional. What does professional mean? It means she's excellent at her job. Are you excellent at your job? I try to be. Then why do you look scared when she texts you? David met his daughter's eyes, Sarah's eyes, that same shade of brown that could see through his carefully constructed facades. Sophie had inherited her mother's perceptiveness, but none of her willingness to abandon ship when the voyage got rough. I'm not scared, Bug, just focused. There's a difference. What's the difference? Eat your pancakes. We leave in 8 minutes. The drive to Maple Leaf Elementary took 14 minutes instead of the projected 12 because a semi had jackknifed on Aurora Avenue, backing up traffic for half a mile. David watched the dashboard clock tick forward, 6:57, 6:58, 6:59, while Sophie narrated her upcoming field trip to the Pacific Science Center, and could she please get a new backpack because Emma Chen had one with holographic stars, and it was so cool, Daddy, so incredibly cool. We'll see. Sophie's face fell. We'll see means no. We'll see means maybe. There's a difference. Adults say that when they mean no, but don't want to be honest. David glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter, 6 years old, and already fluent in the language of parental evasion. You're too smart for your own good. Mrs. Rodriguez says that's a compliment. They pulled up to Maple Leaf Elementary at 7:04. David helped Sophie from her booster seat, smoothed her hair, where it had gone wild during the drive, and walked her to the early care entrance. Ms. Hernandez waved from the doorway, her smile warm, despite the ungodly hour. Running late, Mr. Mitchell. Work emergency. Say goodbye to your dad, Sophie. David knelt and Sophie threw her arms around his neck with the fierce possessiveness of someone who'd learned early that people could vanish without warning. Love you, Bug. Love you, Daddy. Can we get ice cream after school? We'll see. That means maybe. It genuinely means maybe. He kissed her forehead. Be good today. Sophie grabbed Mr. Hoppy from her backpack and ran toward the building, her purple sneakers flashing with each step. David watched until she disappeared inside, then sprinted back to his car. He made it to Cross-Tech Solutions headquarters at 7:21. The building rose 30 floors above downtown Seattle, all glass and steel angles that caught the morning sun and threw it back like a challenge. David's Honda Civic looked profoundly out of place in the parking garage next to the Teslas and Mercedes, but he'd stopped caring about automotive shame somewhere around month 6 of employment. He grabbed his laptop bag and took the elevator to the 15th floor, where the executive offices lived in their rarefied atmosphere of expensive art and carefully curated silence. Victoria's office occupied the corner floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. She was already there, standing at the glass with her back to the door, silhouetted against the brightening sky. She wore one of her armor suits, this one charcoal gray, with knife-edge pleats, her dark hair twisted into the severe bun she deployed like a warning sign. David had worked for Victoria Cross for 3 years and could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen her smile. She wasn't cruel exactly, just operating on a frequency that normal humans couldn't access. She'd built Crosstech on the principle that excellence required total dedication, that personal lives were inefficiencies to be minimized, that weakness was a vulnerability to be eliminated before it metastasized. In 3 years, she'd never asked David about his weekend, never inquired if he had family, never acknowledged that he existed as anything beyond a highly functional extension of her schedule and inbox, which was exactly what David needed. Because the moment Victoria Cross learned he had a daughter, learned he was a single father juggling childcare and school pickups, and the constant mathematics of insufficient income, everything would change. She'd see him differently, not as competent, as complicated, as someone who might choose his child over the company, and in Victoria's binary worldview, that was probably grounds for immediate termination. So David had spent 3 years maintaining the wall. At work, he was the assistant who never refused overtime, who solved problems before they materialized, who existed solely to make Victoria's life run with mechanical precision. At home, he was Sophie's universe, the father who made pancake faces and attended school plays and read Goodnight Moon until his voice gave out. The wall was everything. David set his bag down at his desk, positioned outside Victoria's office like a guard post, and opened his laptop. 73 new emails since he'd logged off at 11 last night. He was triaging them by urgency when Victoria's door opened. Her voice carried its usual crispness. "David?" He looked up. Victoria stood in the doorway, and something in her posture registered as wrong. Not her usual posture of absolute certainty, the stance of someone who'd never second-guessed a decision. This was smaller, uncertain, as if she'd forgotten her lines mid-scene. "Morning, Ms. Cross. I got your text. Is everything prim? Cancel my 9 with Silverman Group. Push the Henderson presentation to tomorrow." David blinked. Victoria never rescheduled with clients, especially not Silverman, who'd been chasing a meeting for 6 weeks. And the Henderson presentation was the cornerstone of this week, the deliverable she'd been obsessing over for a month. "Is there a conflict I'm not aware of?" "Personal matter." The words landed like stones in still water. Victoria Cross didn't have personal matters. She had quarterly earnings and product launches and board meetings. Personal matters belonged to other people, people with lives that extended beyond spreadsheets and strategy sessions. "Of course. I'll send the rescheduling email immediately." "Anything else you need?" Victoria's gaze flickered to her office, then back to David. Something moved across her face, hesitation maybe, or the ghost of a question she'd decided not to ask. "No, that's all." She turned back toward her office, then stopped in the doorway without facing him. "David." "Yes," a pause that stretched too long. "Never mind, just handle the reschedule." The door closed. David stared at it, trying to decode what had just happened. In 3 years, Victoria had never hesitated, never left a thought unfinished, never looked at him like she was about to ask something important and then thought better of it. Something was wrong. The morning unfolded in its usual controlled chaos: conference calls, where David fed Victoria information from 3 monitors, simultaneously a crisis with the development team that required 19 urgent emails, and one very uncomfortable conversation with a contractor in Mumbai who'd missed a deadline by 3 weeks. Lunch at David's desk consisted of a protein bar that tasted like compressed cardboard, and optimism consumed while he reformatted the Henderson presentation and simultaneously researched Seattle childcare options because Sophie's after-school program had just announced a rate increase that would punch a hole in his budget the size of a small car. By 3 o'clock, David had answered 98 emails, attended 4 meetings, and prevented 2 potential disasters through a combination of quick thinking and strategic ass-kissing. He was exhausted in a way that had become so familiar, it felt like his default state. His phone buzzed, a text from Maple Leaf Elementary. "Mr. Mitchell, reminder about the rock collection presentation tomorrow at 2 p.m. Sophie's very excited to show you her project." David's stomach dropped through the floor. The presentation. Sophie had been preparing for 2 weeks 17 rocks collected from significant locations, each one labeled, in her careful block letters, an entire speech about igneous versus sedimentary formations that she'd practiced until David could recite it in his sleep. She'd made him promise, cross his heart, and hope to die that he'd be there. Tomorrow at 2. David pulled up Victoria's calendar. Tomorrow at 2, quarterly review with the board of directors. The meeting Victoria had been engineering for a month, the one that would determine Crosstech's strategic direction for the next fiscal year. The meeting where David absolutely had to be present because he'd compiled all the data built, all the slides, knew every number by heart. He could ask to leave early, frame it as a family emergency, but that would mean explaining Sophie, and then the questions would start. Why didn't you mention a daughter? How long have you been hiding this? Can we really trust someone who keeps secrets? And the wall would crumble, and everything he'd built would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. David closed his eyes and made the calculation he'd been making for 3 years. Work or daughter, security or presence. The choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He texted back, "I'll be there." Then spent 30 minutes mapping how to compress a 3-hour board meeting into 90 minutes so he could maybe possibly theoretically make it to Sophie's school by 2:30. Late, but there. Better than nothing had become his personal motto, etched into his soul like a scar. At 5:15, David was packing his laptop when Jennifer Chen from accounting appeared at his desk. Jennifer had been friendly from day one, though they'd never progressed beyond surface-level small talk and shared complaints about the break room coffee. Her voice carried a knowing edge. Heading out early. 5:30 pickup. The word escaped before David could trap it. Pickup implied a child. He never mentioned Sophie at work. Never. The wall had just developed its first crack. Jennifer's eyebrows climbed. Daycare. David shouldered his bag, trying for nonchalance. Yeah, you know how it is. I do, actually. Jennifer glanced toward Victoria's office, then lowered her voice. I have a 7-year-old. Lily. Cerebral palsy. David stopped moving. I had no idea. That's because I've spent 2 years hiding it. Lying about therapy appointments, pretending I don't need to leave early 3 days a week, living in constant fear that HR will discover I'm not as available as my job description demands. Her smile was bitter. We do what we have to do, right? Hide the parts of ourselves that make us look unreliable. Pretend we don't have lives beyond this building. Because God forbid Victoria Cross discover her employees are human beings with complications. Before David could respond, Victoria's door opened. She emerged wearing her coat, carrying her bag, which was unusual because Victoria never left before 7, sometimes not before 9. She moved through the office with her usual efficiency, but something in her gait registered as off. Tired, maybe, or defeated. David, I'm leaving. Forward any urgent emails to my phone. Of course, have a good evening. Victoria paused, and for the second time that day, she looked like she wanted to say something. Her gaze flickered to Jennifer, and the moment dissolved. You too. She walked toward the elevators. Jennifer waited until the doors closed before turning to David with wide eyes. Okay, that was bizarre. Victoria Cross doesn't leave before 7. Ever. I've worked here 5 years, and I've never seen her exit this building before the sun sets. Is she sick? Personal matter, apparently. Victoria Cross has personal matters. Jennifer shook her head. I've always assumed she was a very sophisticated AI. Brilliant, terrifying, but fundamentally inhuman. David thought about the uncertainty he'd seen in Victoria's posture that morning, the unfinished question hanging in the air. Maybe AI needs maintenance too. Jennifer's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted to something David recognized, the specific panic of a parent receiving unexpected news. I have to go. Lily's therapist just canceled tomorrow's session, which means I need to reschedule, which means lying to my manager again about where I'll be. She looked at David. This system is broken. We shouldn't have to hide our kids like they're shameful secrets. But here we are. After Jennifer left, David sat at his desk for a long moment, staring at Victoria's dark office. Something had shifted today. Some tectonic plate beneath the surface of his carefully organized world. He couldn't identify what exactly. Just that the ground felt less stable than it had 24 hours ago. His phone buzzed. Another text, this time from an unknown number, that David's contacts app identified as Victoria Cross's personal cell, which she'd never used before, their communications strictly confined to her work email and office line. I forgot to tell you something earlier. The company mixer is tonight, at the Fairmont Olympic, 7 p.m. I need you there for the duration. James from marketing gets enthusiastic when there's an open bar. And last year, he toasted the investors by calling them capitalist overlords. I need someone to manage him. David stared at the message, his mind immediately calculating logistics. The mixer would run until at least 9, probably closer to 10 with cleanup. His usual babysitter had texted this morning about a midterm exam, which meant no backup. Taking Sophie meant bringing her to a work event, which meant exposure, which meant the wall developing more cracks. But the alternative was leaving her with a stranger or alone, and that wasn't an option. Would never be an option. He typed back, I'll need to bring my daughter. Babysitter canceled. Can set her up in a side room with an iPad. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, that's fine. Bring her. These events make me uncomfortable anyway. Small talk feels like a waste of time, but employees need to see that leadership cares. So I need you there to make me seem human. David reread the message 3 times, trying to decode it. Victoria admitting discomfort. Victoria admitting she needed help with social interaction. Victoria giving him permission to bring Sophie to a work event after he'd spent 3 years keeping her existence classified. He picked up Sophie at 5:29, 1 minute ahead of schedule, a personal victory. She exploded out of the after-school building, clutching a painting and wearing purple marker streaks across her cheek like war paint. Daddy, look what I made. She thrust the painting at him, an abstract swirl of colors that might have been a sunset or a car accident, or both. It's beautiful, Bug. What is it? It's our family. See, that's you. She pointed to a tall brown rectangle. And that's me, a smaller purple blob. And that's Mr. Hoppy, a gray smudge with button eyes. And that's the space for someone new. David's chest tightened. She'd added a 4th figure larger than her, but smaller than David, colored in shades of blue and silver. A space held open like an invitation or a prayer. Who's the new person, Bug? Sophie's voice went quiet. I don't know yet, but Mrs. Rodriguez says families grow when people choose to love each other. So maybe someone will choose us. David knelt on the sidewalk, ignoring the other parents streaming past, and pulled Sophie close. She smelled like finger paint and the apple slices from her lunch, and he wanted to wrap her in protective layers thick enough to shield her from every disappointment the universe could deliver. Our family is perfect just the way it is, Bug. You, me, and Mr. Hoppy. I know. Sophie pulled back, and her eyes, Sarah's eyes, held a wisdom that shouldn't have fit inside a 6-year-old. But what if the blue person is coming, and we just don't know it yet? What if they're already on their way? David had no answer for that, so he did what he always did when parenting got too existential. He deflected. Ice cream. Her face transformed. Really? But you said we'll see this morning. This morning I was stressed. Now I'm less stressed. Temporary ice cream amnesty. They went to their usual spot, a tiny shop near Green Lake that sold soft serve for $3 a cone, the only extravagance David allowed himself with any regularity. Sophie got chocolate vanilla swirl. David got black coffee because caffeine was cheaper than therapy, and they sat on a bench watching ducks fight over breadcrumbs while the spring evening settled around them with the weight of gathering storms. Sophie's voice came quiet between licks of melting ice cream. Daddy, are you coming to my presentation tomorrow? The question landed like a blade between his ribs. David had prepared for this, had constructed the careful hedge he'd deploy. I'll try, Bug. I've got a really important meeting, but I'll do my best. But looking at his daughter's hopeful face, at the chocolate smeared on her chin, and the absolute trust in her eyes, he couldn't do it. Couldn't hedge or equivocate or prepare her for the possibility of his absence. I'll be there. 2 p.m. right. 2 p.m. Sophie threw her arms around his neck, getting ice cream on his collar. You're the best daddy ever. David hugged her back and tried not to think about the board meeting he was going to have to sabotage, the excuses he'd need to manufacture, the risk he was taking by choosing her over Victoria's expectations. Sophie needed him. That was all that mattered. They got home at 6:45. David made spaghetti while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table, multiplication tables that she attacked with grim determination, muttering numbers under her breath like incantations. Bath time, pajamas, the nightly negotiation about whether Mr. Hoppy needed to be tucked in separately or could share Sophie's pillow. By 8:30, Sophie was finally asleep, and David was standing in his bedroom, staring at his closet, trying to decide what one wore to a company event when bringing one's previously secret child. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria, timestamp 8:47 p.m. Forgot to mention, Sophie can stay in the Windsor room at the Fairmont. It's a side room off the main ballroom. Quiet. She'll be comfortable there, Trevor. David stared at the message. Victoria had researched the venue layout, had thought about Sophie's comfort, had texted him at almost 9 at night about logistics for a child she'd never met. Something was definitely wrong. He texted back, "Thank you. We'll be there at 7. The response came immediately. "See you then," and David. "Thank you for managing this. I know it's complicated." David set down his phone and sat on his bed trying to process the day's accumulation of strangeness. Victoria canceling meetings. Victoria leaving early. Victoria texting from her personal phone. Victoria acknowledging that asking him to bring Sophie to a work event was complicated rather than pretending everything was normal. The wall between his two lives had developed cracks, and David had no idea if that meant disaster or salvation. He fell asleep on top of the covers, still dressed, and dreamed of tightropes stretching across canyons while Sophie called his name from the other side. The next morning arrived too fast. David woke at 6:30 to find Sophie already in his bed, curled against his side like she used to when she was 3, and nightmares felt real. "Morning, Bug." "Morning, Daddy. Is today the presentation?" "Today's the presentation." "And you're coming?" "I promised, didn't I?" Sophie smiled and burrowed deeper into his side, and David let himself have this moment, 5 minutes of peace before the chaos began. Then he extracted himself and started the morning routine pancakes outfits. The constant time pressure of getting a 6-year-old out the door, when said 6-year-old was currently insisting that only her purple dress with sparkles was appropriate for presenting rocks. "Bug, you're wearing your school uniform. But this is special. You can wear the purple dress tonight to the work party." Sophie's eyes went wide. "I'm going to your work party. You're going to sit in a quiet room and color while Daddy makes sure his coworkers don't do anything embarrassing. It's going to be boring." "Will there be fancy food?" "Probably." "Then it won't be boring. Can I bring Mr. Hoppy?" "Absolutely." They made it to school with 2 minutes to spare. David walked Sophie to her classroom, where Mrs. Rodriguez greeted them with her usual warmth. "Big day today, Sophie? Are you ready to present your rocks?" "My daddy's coming to watch." Mrs. Rodriguez met David's eyes over Sophie's head, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or recognition of what it meant for a single father to rearrange his life to attend a 6-year-old's geology presentation. "We'll see you at 2, Mr. Mitchell." "I'll be there." David made it to Crosstech by 7:53. The executive floor was already humming with pre-meeting energy, people power walking between offices, voices raised in urgent phone calls, the particular electricity that preceded board meetings. Victoria was in her office staring at her laptop with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve differential equations through sheer force of will. She looked up when David appeared in the doorway. "Morning. Status check on the Henderson presentation. Finalized, loaded into the system, hard copies printed and in the boardroom. Board packets, assembled and distributed. Silverman reschedule, confirmed for next Tuesday." Victoria nodded, then did something unexpected. She closed her laptop and looked at David directly. No email or screen mediating their interaction. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not ask questions until I'm finished." David's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment she fired him, or demoted him, or told him the company was restructuring, and his position had been eliminated. He'd been waiting for this shoe to drop for 3 years. "Okay. Last night after I left the office, I went back to the Fairmont to check the setup for tonight's mixer, and I found something in the fountain near the lobby entrance." Victoria opened her desk drawer and pulled out a stuffed rabbit. Gray and worn, one button eye hanging at an angle David recognized with the force of a gut punch. "Mr. Hoppy, I believe this belongs to your daughter." David's brain stuttered, trying to process the impossible. "Mr. Hoppy, here," in Victoria Cross's hand, which meant Sophie had brought him yesterday. No, that didn't make sense. Yesterday. Sophie was at school all day. They'd come straight home after pickup, gone for ice cream. She'd had him at bedtime. And then David remembered. 2 weeks ago, the last company event, a smaller mixer for the executive team. His babysitter had canceled, and David had brought Sophie, hidden her in a side office with strict instructions not to leave. He checked on her every 15 minutes, brought her snacks, thought he'd successfully kept his two worlds separate. But Sophie must have left the office, must have explored, must have lost Mr. Hoppy somewhere in the Fairmont's labyrinth of event spaces. And Victoria had found him, which meant Victoria knew. David's carefully constructed wall had just collapsed into rubble. His voice came out wrong, thin and strained. I can explain. You have a daughter, that's the explanation. Victoria set Mr. Hoppy on her desk with surprising gentleness. I researched it last night. Children form strong attachments to transitional objects. The distress of losing such objects can impact sleep patterns, emotional regulation, daily functioning. I thought it best to return him as quickly as possible. David stared at her. Victoria Cross had spent her evening researching childhood development psychology because his daughter had lost a stuffed rabbit. You didn't have to do that. She's 6, isn't she? That's peak attachment age. How did you... The embroidery on his ear. Sophie age 2, happy birthday. Basic math from there. Victoria met his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung between them, weighted with 3 years of careful deception. Because people make assumptions about single fathers, about reliability, about whether we can really commit to demanding jobs when we have kids at home. David's voice carried an edge he couldn't quite file smooth. I've learned it's easier to keep personal and professional lives separate. Easier for whom? Everyone. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I'm bringing this to your house, to return it directly to Sophie. What's your address? Ms. Cross, you don't need to. I researched attachment theory, David. The distress a child experiences waking up without their comfort object can be significant. I'm bringing it to her before school. What's your address? David's world tilted on its axis. Victoria Cross, CEO and architect of his professional existence, was coming to his house, was going to see where he lived, the small rental with its worn furniture and crayon marks and the general chaos that came with raising a 6-year-old alone. She was going to see everything. But looking at Mr. Hoppy on her desk at the care she'd taken to research why a stuffed rabbit mattered, David realized he was tired. Tired of maintaining walls. Tired of living in separate boxes. Tired of pretending he was anything other than a single father trying his best. He gave her his address. Victoria nodded once. I'll be there at 7 tomorrow morning, before school. After she left, David sat at his desk and tried to process what had just happened. The wall had crumbled. Victoria knew about Sophie. And instead of judgment or disappointment or the subtle recalibration he'd feared, she'd researched childhood psychology and was personally returning a lost toy. Nothing made sense anymore. The day crawled forward. At 1:30, David appeared in Victoria's office doorway with his coat and bag. I need to leave. Family matter. Victoria looked up from the board presentation she'd been reviewing. The presentation's in 30 minutes. I know, I'm sorry, it's urgent. He waited for anger for the cold fury Victoria deployed when people disrupted her carefully orchestrated plans. Instead, she just studied him with those analytical eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the desperate calculations underneath. Go, Jennifer can cover the data questions. We'll manage. David was halfway to the elevator when Victoria called after him. David, he turned. Whatever it is, I hope everything's okay. The genuine concern in her voice nearly undid him. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and fled. He made it to Maple Leaf Elementary at 1:58. Mrs. Rodriguez met him in the hallway with relief written across her face. Mr. Mitchell, Sophie's been watching the door for the last hour. I think she was afraid you wouldn't come. David found Sophie at the front of her classroom, surrounded by rocks, spread across a folding table, her face pale with anxiety that transformed to pure joy when she saw him. Daddy. She waved so hard her whole body shook. David slid into a tiny first-grade chair, his knees practically touching his chin, and watched his daughter present her rock collection with the serious intensity of someone defending a doctoral dissertation. This rock is from the beach where Daddy proposed to Mommy. She held up a smooth gray stone. Even though Mommy isn't here anymore, the rock remembers. David's throat closed. And this one is from our backyard. It's igneous, which means it came from volcano lava like 1 million years ago. And this one, a tiny purple crystal, is from the hospital where I was born. Daddy kept it for me in his drawer, and I found it when I was 5. David had forgotten about that crystal. The landscaping outside Swedish Medical Center had been under renovation the day Sophie was born, and in the exhausted delirium of new fatherhood, he'd picked up a piece of decorative quartz and pocketed it. 6 years later, Sophie had discovered it and declared it treasure. You're supposed to keep things from important days so you remember them forever. After the presentation, after the other parents had filtered out and Sophie had carefully packed her rocks back into their labeled containers, David knelt beside her. That was incredible, Bug. I'm so proud of you. I'm glad you came, Daddy. I was worried you'd forget. I'll never forget the important stuff. Promise. Cross my heart. They had 4 hours before the company mixer. David took Sophie home, let her watch her allotted 30 minutes of television, and while he changed into event-appropriate clothes and tried not to have a panic attack about bringing his daughter into Victoria's world. At 6:45, they pulled up to the Fairmont Olympic. The hotel rose like a monument to wealth. David would never accumulate marble columns and crystal chandeliers and the kind of hushed elegance that made his Honda Civic look like a refugee from a junkyard. Sophie's eyes went wide. Daddy, this place is fancy. Super fancy. Which means we're on our best behavior. I'm always on my best behavior. David led Sophie through the lobby to the second floor where Crosstech had rented the main ballroom and surrounding rooms. The Windsor room was small and quiet, with couches and dim lighting, perfect for a 6-year-old to camp out with an iPad. Okay, Bug, you stay here. Don't leave unless you absolutely need to find me. And if you need me, you text. Okay. Sophie was already absorbed in a game. Okay, Daddy. David returned to the ballroom just as Victoria arrived. She wore a navy dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent, her hair down, instead of in its usual severe bun. She looked different, softer, still intimidating, but in a way that suggested competence rather than coldness. David, status? Bars open, caterings, set of Vs ready for your 8 o'clock remarks. James from marketing is 2 drinks in, but still forming coherent sentences. And Sophie, Windsor room. She's fine. Victoria nodded. Stay close. I have a feeling this is going to be a long night. It was. By 7:30, James from marketing was 3 drinks past coherent and telling increasingly inappropriate jokes to anyone trapped within earshot. David intercepted him twice, once steering him toward the appetizer table, once physically removing a microphone from his hand before he could say a few words that would definitely have ended in a lawsuit. By 8, Victoria had delivered her remarks with the emotional range of someone reading a phone book. Though the content was good, David had written most of it after all. By 8:30, David had checked on Sophie 4 times. Each time she was exactly where he'd left her, perfectly content with her iPad and coloring books. By 9, David was starting to think they might actually survive this intact. Then Sophie appeared in the ballroom doorway, her face crumpling, with the particular devastation of someone who'd lost something irreplaceable. David crossed the room in seconds, kneeling in front of her. Bug, what's wrong? I can't find the keychain bunny. Her voice broke on the words. The little one from my backpack. I wanted to show him the fancy hotel, but he's gone. David glanced around the ballroom. 200 people. Servers moving with trays. 1,000 places a tiny keychain could disappear. And Sophie was crying hard enough that people were starting to notice, including Victoria. She materialized beside them with the uncanny timing she brought to all crises. Is everything all right? Lost toy, small keychain bunny, I'll find it. But Victoria was already kneeling beside Sophie, bringing herself to eye level with a 6-year-old for possibly the first time in her life. The gesture was so unexpected. Victoria Cross, CEO, in a designer dress, crouching on a hotel floor, that Sophie stopped crying from sheer surprise. What does the bunny look like? Sophie sniffled. Brown and white, really little, on a keychain. Where did you last see him? The Windsor room, on the table. Victoria stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd never questioned their right to command any space. Stay here, I'll check the room. She was gone before David could protest, striding toward the side rooms with the kind of determination usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Sophie looked up at David with wide eyes. Is that your boss? Yes. She's not scary. She's nice. 5 minutes later, Victoria returned. In her hand was a tiny stuffed bunny on a keychain, slightly dusty but intact. Sophie's face transformed. "You found him." Victoria handed over the keychain. "He was under the table, must have fallen." Sophie threw her arms around Victoria's waist in an impulsive hug that made Victoria freeze completely. For a moment, she stood rigid, arms hovering uncertainly, her expression cycling through confusion, panic, and something that looked almost like yearning. Then carefully, her arms came down and returned the embrace. "Thank you for finding him." "You're welcome." Victoria's voice carried a gentleness David had never heard. "What's your name?" "Sophie. I'm 6. "I'm Victoria." "I'm older than 6. "Do you have any kids?" "No." "Why not?" David winced. "Sophie, that's not polite." "It's fine." Victoria looked at Sophie with surprising seriousness. "I've been very busy with work. Sometimes when you focus on one thing, you miss other things. Like how Daddy almost missed my presentation because of work." David's face burned. "Bug, I didn't miss it. I was there." "But you almost did. You had to leave the important meeting." Victoria's gaze shifted to David, something complicated moving across her face. "You left the board meeting of family emergency." "A school presentation is not an emergency." Sophie's voice carried the merciless honesty of children everywhere. "It's just something Daddy promised to come to. But his work is really important, so sometimes he has to choose." Victoria was very quiet. David could practically see her recalculating everything she knew about him, the occasional early departures, the carefully maintained boundaries, the 3 years of perfect performance built on a foundation of desperate juggling. Rocks are important too, sometimes more important than board meetings. Sophie beamed. "I have 17 rocks. Do you want to see them?" "Sophie," David started. "Another time," Victoria said gently. "Right now you should stay with your father. He was worried about you wandering around." After Sophie returned to the Windsor room clutching both Mr. Hoppy and the rescued keychain bunny, David and Victoria stood in awkward silence while the party continued around them. "You have a daughter." Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. "I mentioned that this morning. You didn't mention she's here, that you brought her because you don't have childcare, that you left a board meeting for a school presentation." David met her gaze. "Sophie comes first. Always. I try to minimize the impact on my work, but she's my priority. If that's a problem." "It's not a problem, it's—" Victoria stopped searching for words. "I've worked with you for 3 years, and I knew nothing about this. About her. About the impossible balance you're maintaining every single day. I keep my personal and professional lives separate." "Why?" "Because mixing them means being seen as unreliable, uncommitted, not serious about the work. I've learned it's better to keep the worlds apart." Victoria looked toward the Windsor room where Sophie had disappeared. "She seems like a remarkable kid." "She is. And you're raising her alone. Her mother left when she was 3. That must be difficult." David gave a short laugh that came out bitter. "Difficult is one word for it. Terrifying, exhausting. The best and worst thing that ever happened to me." They stood in the humming silence of 200 people pretending to enjoy mandatory fun. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I'm sorry I didn't know. I should have asked. Should have cared about the people who work for me as people, not just as productivity metrics. You're not responsible for my childcare arrangements." "No, but I created a culture where you felt you had to hide her, where showing any sign of having a life outside this company felt like a liability." Victoria's voice was quiet. "That's on me." Before David could respond, James from marketing appeared swaying slightly, about to launch into what was clearly going to be a toast that would end several careers, including his own. "I should," David gestured toward the impending disaster. "Yes, go." David spent the next hour managing damage control, steering drunk employees away from investors, intercepting inappropriate toasts, being the invisible hand that kept the event from degenerating into chaos. By 10:30, the party was winding down, and David was ready to collect Sophie and go home. He found her asleep on the couch in the Windsor room, Mr. Hoppy and Keychain Bunny both clutched in her arms. "Hey, Bug." He gently shook her shoulder. "Time to go home." Sophie stirred. "Is the party over?" "All over." He carried her to the car. She was getting too big for this, but she was his baby, and he'd carry her as long as she'd let him, and drove home through empty streets while Sophie dozed in the back seat. They got home at 11:15. David changed Sophie into pajamas without fully waking her, tucked her in with her stuffed animals, and stood in her doorway watching her sleep for a long moment. Then he went downstairs, sat on his couch, and pulled out his phone. No messages from Victoria, which was somehow worse than a message would have been. David thought about the way Victoria had looked at Sophie, the way she'd researched attachment theory, the way she'd personally returned a lost toy and was planning to return another in the morning. Something had shifted. The wall between his two lives had crumbled, and David had no idea if that meant disaster or something he didn't dare name. He was still sitting there at midnight when his phone finally buzzed. A text from Victoria had found something else. Mr. Hoppy, brown worn one button eye. Is it Sophie's? David's heart stopped. Mr. Hoppy, Sophie had taken him to the party in her backpack and left him behind. He typed back, yes, her favorite. She's going to be devastated in the morning. The response came immediately. I'll bring it to you. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. What's your address? David stared at the screen. Victoria Cross was coming to his house, was going to see where he lived, how he lived the small, imperfect life he'd built in the spaces between work and survival. She was going to see everything. He sent his address and waited for tomorrow. Part 2, Crossing Boundaries. The knock came at 7:13, 3 minutes late by Victoria Cross's usual standards, but early enough that David was still scrambling to hide evidence of their actual life. He'd been awake since 5 cleaning, with the manic energy of someone expecting a home inspection. Bills stuffed in drawers. Sophie's art projects stacked instead of scattered. The living room achieving a level of organization that wouldn't survive Sophie's return from school, but might pass cursory CEO scrutiny. Sophie stood at the door before David could stop her, pulling it open with the fearlessness of someone who'd never learned that strangers could be dangerous. Victoria Cross stood on his doorstep in jeans. David's brain stuttered over the detail. 3 years of working together, and he'd never seen her in anything except suits that cost more than his rent. But here she was in dark denim, in a gray sweater, her hair loose instead of weaponized into submission, looking younger and fundamentally wrong for his neighborhood, like a Lamborghini parked outside a thrift store. In her hands, Mr. Hoppy. Sophie's shriek could have shattered windows. She grabbed the rabbit and crushed it against her chest hard enough to compress stuffing. Mr. Hoppy, Daddy said you were lost, but I knew you'd come back. Victoria's expression did something complicated, surprise bleeding into confusion, bleeding into something that looked dangerously close to tears before she locked it down. He was under the fountain in the lobby. I went back after everyone left to check. David found his voice. You went back to the hotel last night. I couldn't leave him there overnight. The research suggested that waking without the attachment object could trigger significant distress. Victoria's gaze moved past Sophie to David, taking in his sweatpants and coffee-stained college shirt, the general dishevelment of his mourning father state. I thought you'd be awake with Sophie. Were making breakfast. Pancakes. Sophie grabbed Victoria's hand without asking permission and started pulling her inside. Daddy makes the best pancakes in the whole world, and you have to try them. David watched his boss get towed across the threshold into his life, watched her eyes track over the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the laundry basket he'd meant to fold, Sophie's backpack, vomiting homework across the entry table, and felt 3 years of careful boundaries dissolve like sugar in rain. Victoria's voice came quiet. Your home is warm. Not nice or cozy or any of the polite lies people deployed. Just warm, like she was identifying something foreign and possibly threatening. It's small and messy. I was going to clean more, but I didn't say it was a disaster. I said it was warm. There's a difference. Sophie tugged harder on Victoria's hand. Come see the kitchen. Daddy's making smiley faces with strawberries. The kitchen was chaos, crystallized flour everywhere, butter wrappers on the counter, the mixing bowl still wearing yesterday's dried batter like a memorial. David had the griddle heating and ingredients assembled in the frantic choreography of someone who'd made this meal 1,000 times on insufficient sleep. Victoria stood in the middle of his disaster zone, looking profoundly uncertain, her hands moving from the table to her sides to the table again, like she'd forgotten how to exist in non-professional spaces. You can sit. This'll just take a few minutes. She sat. Sophie immediately climbed into her lap without asking, settling there with the casual presumption of someone who decided Victoria was safe and therefore fair game for invasion. Do you have any kids, Sophie? David kept his voice gentle but firm. We talked about this question. It's personal. But she found Mr. Hoppy. That means she's nice and nice people answer questions. Victoria looked down at Sophie with an expression David couldn't decode. No, I don't have children. Why not? I spent my life building my company. I thought there would be time later for other things. But later kept becoming never. The honesty landed like a stone in still water. Sophie processed this with the seriousness of someone conducting an interview. That's sad. Yes, it is. David poured batter onto the griddle, watching the edges bubble and firm, while trying to process Victoria Cross sitting in his kitchen, admitting regret to a 6-year-old. The universe had stopped making sense somewhere around yesterday and showed no signs of course correcting. Sophie shifted in Victoria's lap to better examine her face. Daddy says some people are too busy being important to have families. Are you too important? Sophie, that's enough. It's all right. Victoria met David's eyes across the small kitchen. I'm beginning to think importance is a poor substitute for connection. David flipped the pancake perfect arc, perfect catch, and slid it onto a plate, added strawberry eyes and a banana smile, set it before Sophie, who'd migrated back to her own chair, but was still studying Victoria like a specimen under glass. These are exceptional. Victoria's voice carried genuine surprise after her first bite. There's cinnamon and something else, nutmeg. Just a tiny amount. Most people don't catch it. I noticed details. Their eyes met and held for a beat too long. 3 years of David anticipating her needs, learning her patterns, becoming fluent in the unspoken language of her preferences. 3 years of Victoria never noticing him as anything beyond competent infrastructure. Until now. Sophie demolished her pancakes while narrating yesterday's presentation. The rocks and their stories, how Daddy had come even though he had the really important meeting. Victoria listened with the focus she usually reserved for quarterly earnings, asking follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. Can I show you my room? I have the rocks there, and also my rock books, and Daddy says I'm going to be a geologist when I grow up. David opened his mouth to deflect, but Victoria was already standing. I'd like to see them. They disappeared upstairs, Sophie's chatter echoing down like birdsong, leaving David alone in his kitchen, trying to understand how his carefully separated worlds had merged so completely in under 18 hours. He cleaned mechanically, scraping plates and wiping counters, while overhead came the sound of Sophie's tour and Victoria's lower responses. By the time David finished showering and dressing for work, 30 minutes had evaporated. He found Victoria and Sophie sitting on the floor of Sophie's room, surrounded by an explosion of rocks, Victoria examining a piece of quartz like it held the secrets of the universe. This one is from the hospital where I was born. Sophie's voice carried the weight of someone sharing classified information. Daddy kept it in his drawer for 6 whole years, and when I found it, I knew it was special. Victoria looked up as David appeared in the doorway. Something in her expression had shifted, softened like armor, developing stress fractures. She has 17 specimens, each with documented provenance and geological classification. This is remarkable organizational thinking for a 6-year-old. She gets it from her father. The words escaped before David could filter them. Victoria's gaze sharpened, and for a moment they just looked at each other, while Sophie chattered about sedimentary versus igneous formations. I should let you get to work. Victoria stood, stepping carefully around the rock collection. Thank you for breakfast. Thank you for returning Mr. Hoppy and for going back to the hotel. You didn't have to do that. I couldn't leave him there. Sophie needed him. They moved downstairs, Sophie trailing behind with Mr. Hoppy tucked under one arm. At the door, Victoria paused with her hand on the knob. Can I come back for dinner? Sophie's squeal of delight answered before David could process the question. Yes, please, you have to come back. Victoria's eyes stayed on David. If you don't mind. Every rational part of David's brain screamed danger. This was his boss. The power dynamic was already complicated before she started inserting herself into their domestic life. Letting her deeper into their world meant more vulnerability, more risk, more chances for everything to explode catastrophically. But looking at Victoria's expression, uncertain and almost hopeful, David heard himself say words he'd regret or treasure depending on how this ended. 6:30, but it's just spaghetti from a jar. I don't want fancy, I want this. After Victoria left, Sophie immediately launched into planning mode. What should they cook? Could they make the table nice? Should she wear her purple dress again? David let her chatter wash over him while his mind spun through implications. Victoria Cross was coming to dinner. Again. This wasn't accident or obligation anymore. This was intention. At work, the day proceeded with the surreal quality of a fever dream. Victoria emerged from her office at 10, caught David's eye, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the quarterly reports or client meetings. Jennifer noticed. Of course, Jennifer noticed and cornered David in the break room. Okay, what's happening? You and Victoria have been making eye contact all morning like you're sharing secret codes. And she's smiling. Victoria Cross is smiling. I've worked here 5 years, and I've seen her smile exactly twice, both times when the stock price jumped. She met Sophie. Jennifer's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Your daughter Victoria knows about your daughter. She found Mr. Hoppy at the company event, researched childhood attachment theory, returned him this morning at 7 a.m., and is coming to dinner tonight. David, Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. That woman doesn't do personal. She doesn't do human connection. The fact that she's showing up at your house meeting your kid, researching psychology, that's not normal boss behavior. That's something else entirely. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to cross a line that's going to get very complicated very fast. And you're the one who'll pay the price if it goes wrong. David wanted to argue, but Jennifer was right. The power imbalance was real and dangerous. Victoria could walk away anytime. David would lose his job, his income, Sophie's stability, everything. But he kept thinking about the way Victoria had looked at Sophie's rock collection, the way she'd admitted her life felt empty, the way she'd said, I want this, like she was confessing something shameful and necessary. At 2 o'clock, David's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez. Mr. Mitchell just wanted to let you know Sophie had a wonderful day. She's been telling everyone about the nice lady who found Mr. Hoppy. Thought you'd want to know. David stared at the message, warmth and dread mixing in his chest. Sophie was getting attached, talking about Victoria to her classmates, building expectations that might shatter if this thing, whatever this thing was, fell apart. At 3:15, something happened that would later seem like foreshadowing. Jennifer appeared at David's desk with a manila folder, her expression troubled. Can I show you something off the record? David glanced toward Victoria's office door, closed on a call. Sure. Jennifer opened the folder. Inside were printouts of financial documents, spreadsheets with highlighted discrepancies. I've been reconciling the Q4 budget for my annual review, and I found something odd. Small transfers, always under 10,000, always to the same offshore account. Over 2 years, it adds up to almost 2 million. David's pulse quickened. Have you told anyone? Just you, because I don't know who to trust. These transfers have Richard Chen's approval code on them. Richard Chen, board member CFO, the man who'd been with Crosstech since the beginning. That doesn't make sense. Richard's been here for a decade. I know, which is why I'm second-guessing myself. Maybe it's legitimate. Maybe there's an explanation. Jennifer's voice was tight. But if it's not, David, this could destroy the company. And if I'm wrong, it could destroy my career. What do you need from me? Nothing yet. Just keep your eyes open. If Victoria starts making changes, if Richard pushes back hard, it might not just be about culture or policy. It might be about protecting something bigger. After Jennifer left, David sat staring at his computer screen, trying to process the implications. 2 million in unauthorized transfers. Richard Chen's fingerprints all over it. And Victoria about to restructure the entire company, which would mean new oversight, new audits, new scrutiny. If Richard was hiding something, he'd fight back hard. David filed the information away and tried to focus on work. But the day had taken on a different weight, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. He picked up Sophie at 5:30, watched her bounce into the car with energy that suggested she'd been vibrating at higher frequencies all day. Is Victoria coming? Did she cancel? What are we making for dinner? She's coming. We're making spaghetti. And Bug, I need you to understand something. Sophie's face went serious. What? Victoria is my boss. She's being very kind to us, but that doesn't mean she's going to be part of our family forever. Sometimes grown-ups spend time together and then they don't anymore. And that's okay. But what if she wants to stay? We'll deal with that if it happens, but right now, let's just have dinner and not make plans, okay? Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone weighing nuclear options. Okay, but Daddy, I think she's lonely. When she looked at my rocks, she had sad eyes, like she wants something she doesn't have. Now, David's 6-year-old had just psychoanalyzed a billionaire CEO with more accuracy than most therapists could manage. You're very perceptive, Bug. Mrs. Rodriguez says that means I notice things? It does. Now let's go home and make this spaghetti less sad than the jar suggests. Victoria arrived at 6:29, carrying grocery bags that probably cost more than David's weekly budget. She changed from her work suit into jeans again. Apparently this was her new uniform for visiting his house, and looked simultaneously more comfortable and more uncertain than David had ever seen her. I know you said not to bring anything, but I couldn't show up empty-handed. She started unpacking organic vegetables, artisan pasta bread, from the expensive bakery cheese that came in shapes David didn't recognize. I've never done this before. Brought dinner to someone's home. I wasn't sure what the protocol was. There is no protocol. It's just dinner. Nothing is just anything with me. I'm beginning to realize that's a problem. Sophie appeared wearing her purple sparkly dress in a tiara that had materialized from some box of costume jewelry. Victoria, you came back, Shag. I promised I would. Daddy says promises are important, that you should only make promises you can keep. Victoria knelt to Sophie's eye level, and David watched his boss, the woman who could make venture capitalists weep, look at his daughter with something approaching reverence. Your father is right. I don't make promises I can't keep. They cooked together, all three of them crowded into David's small kitchen. Victoria attempted to help, but proved spectacularly incompetent at basic tasks, cutting vegetables into wildly uneven chunks, nearly burning the garlic, asking questions that suggested she'd never actually prepared food from raw ingredients. How do you not know how to mince garlic? David kept his tone light, teasing rather than critical. I eat out, or have things delivered. Or don't eat at all if I'm working late. Victoria studied the knife in her hand like it was alien technology. My penthouse has a kitchen that costs $60,000, and I've used it exactly twice, both times to make coffee. That's sad, Sophie pronounced judgment from her perch on the counter. Kitchens are for making food and memories. That's what Daddy says. Your father says a lot of wise things. They assembled dinner through collaborative chaos. Victoria getting better with each task, Sophie providing color commentary, David trying not to think about how this felt dangerously close to family. The kind of domestic tableau he'd stopped imagining after Sarah left. Over spaghetti that tasted better than jarred sauce had any right to taste Victoria's expensive ingredients. Elevated it considerably. Sophie monopolized the conversation with questions that would make a prosecuting attorney proud. Did Victoria have pets? No, she traveled too much. Did she like roller coasters? Never been on one. Could she do a cartwheel? Definitely not. You've never been on a roller coaster. Sophie's voice carried the scandalized weight of someone discovering murder. Daddy, we have to take Victoria to the fair. The fair is in August, Bug. Then we'll go in August. Sophie looked at Victoria with absolute certainty. You'll come with us, right? Victoria's expression did something complicated. I'd like that. David tried not to calculate the odds of this lasting 4 months. Tried not to think about how Sophie was building a future that included Victoria constructing a family portrait in her mind that might never exist outside imagination. After dinner, Sophie insisted on showing Victoria her new drawing, a picture of 3 people holding hands that she'd made at school. That's you, Daddy, and that's me, and that's Victoria. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she took the paper. It's beautiful. You can keep it if you want. I'd love that. David watched Victoria fold the drawing with surprising care and tuck it into her purse like it was something precious. Like a child's crayon scribbles mattered more than the $1 million contracts she negotiated daily. At 8, Sophie started yawning. David initiated bedtime protocols, teeth-brushing pajamas, the negotiation about story quantity. Sophie looked at Victoria with hopeful eyes. "Can you read me a story?" David gave Victoria an escape route with his expression, but she just nodded. "I'd be honored." They went upstairs together, all three of them, Sophie selecting Where the Wild Things Are from her shelf. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed reading with the same focused intensity she brought to board presentations. And when she got to the part where Max's mother calls him Wild Thing, and he grins, Sophie giggled, and Victoria laughed, a real surprise laugh that transformed her entire face. David stood in the doorway watching and felt something dangerous bloom in his chest. Something that felt like hope or doom depending on how the story ended. After Sophie fell asleep, David and Victoria crept downstairs. The house settled into evening quiet around them, more intimate than any boardroom or office space could ever be. They ended up on the couch, careful distance between them, coffee mugs in hand. "Thank you." Victoria's voice was soft. "For letting me be here. Thank you for wanting to be here. David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to be honest about whether this is inappropriate." David's pulse quickened. "Okay. I've spent 3 years working with you, watching you be unfailingly competent and professional. You anticipate my needs before I voice them. You solve problems before they become crises. You've made my life run smoothly in ways I don't think I've fully appreciated." She set down her mug, and I never asked why. Never wondered what motivated someone to be so dedicated, so careful, so present. Victoria looked at him directly. "Now I know. You were protecting Sophie. Everything you did, the long hours, the perfect performance, the refusal to show weakness, it was all to make sure you could keep this job and keep her safe. You turned yourself into exactly what I needed because that was the only way to survive." David's throat was tight. "I did what I had to do. And I enabled it, created a culture where you felt you had to hide your daughter, where Jennifer's been lying about Lily's disability for 2 years, where people are terrified to be human because human means weak." Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. "I should have known, should have asked, should have cared about the people who work for me as people, not just as productivity metrics. You didn't know. I should have known, and now that I do, I'm going to change it. The policies, the culture, all of it." David felt something cold settle in his chest. "You can't restructure an entire company because of me. Not because of you, because of me. Because I've been doing this wrong for 10 years and meeting Sophie, seeing what I've been missing. It's made me realize that success isn't just revenue and market share. It's being able to go home at night to people who matter. It's showing up for school presentations. It's knowing how to cook spaghetti." The words hung between them, weighted with implications David wasn't ready to examine. Victoria stood abruptly, moved toward the door, then turned back. "I want to keep coming here, if you'll let me." "Why?" "Because when I'm here, I remember what it feels like to be human." After Victoria left, David sat on his couch in the dark and tried to process what had just happened. The walls between his lives had completely dissolved. Victoria was becoming part of their routine, their world, Sophie's expectations. This couldn't end well. But David was tired of protecting himself at the cost of living, tired of maintaining separation, tired of being lonely while surrounded by people. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, thank you for dinner and for letting me be part of something real, even briefly." David typed back, "See you tomorrow." The response came immediately, 6:30 a.m. "I'll bring coffee, the good kind." David smiled despite every rational objection his brain could manufacture. "See you then." The next morning, Victoria arrived at 6:30 carrying expensive coffee and pastries that made grocery store donuts look like cardboard. She helped Sophie pick an outfit, a process that revealed Victoria's complete lack of childhood clothing knowledge, but willingness to learn, and attempted to make eggs while David supervised like a nervous flight instructor. She burned them. The smoke alarm went off. Sophie thought it was hilarious. "I'm terrible at this." Victoria stared at the blackened pan with something approaching despair. "You're learning, that's what matters." It became a pattern, Victoria showing up every morning, integrating herself into their routine with the determined focus she brought to hostile takeovers. She learned to braid hair after David showed her once practiced on Sophie until she could execute a passable French braid. She memorized Sophie's school schedule, her allergy list, the names of her friends. She asked questions and listened to answers like they mattered. At work, things shifted. People noticed David and Victoria arriving together, leaving together. Noticed Victoria departing at 6 instead of 9. Noticed the way they smiled at each other in meetings. The gossip reached critical mass by Thursday. Jennifer materialized at David's desk with an expression that mixed concern and accusation. "So, you and Victoria are having dinner sometimes." "David, she restructured your entire compensation package. 30% raise plus housing allowance. That's not dinner sometimes, that's something else entirely." David had been trying not to think about the raise. Victoria had announced it Monday via email framed as correcting market rate discrepancies. But the timing was suspicious enough to make HR's collective eyebrows climb. "She said she was underpaying me." She was, but the question is why she suddenly noticed. Jennifer leaned against his desk. "You're falling for her." "I'm not." "You are. I've seen you look at her when she's not paying attention, like she hung the moon and invented gravity. And David, I understand the appeal. She's brilliant and powerful and apparently capable of growth. But she's also your boss. The power dynamic here is dangerous. If this goes wrong, you're the one who loses everything." The words hit hard because they were true. David had been trying not to think about it, the fundamental inequality of their situation. Victoria could walk away anytime without consequence. David would lose his job, his income, Sophie's stability, everything. "I'm being careful." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're falling in love with someone who could destroy your life without even trying." That afternoon, David made his first real mistake. He was supposed to attend Sophie's spring concert at 2. She'd been practicing her recorder solo for weeks, had extracted promises measured in blood that he'd be there. But at 1 o'clock, Victoria's biggest client called with an emergency. The Tokyo deal worth $50 million was collapsing. The client demanded an immediate video conference and needed data only David had compiled. Victoria appeared at his desk, her face tight with the particular stress that meant she was one crisis away from someone getting fired. "I need you on this call. Now." "I have—" David stopped. Telling Victoria he had a school concert felt impossible in that moment, with her looking at him like the entire company was about to implode. "I can do 30 minutes, then I have to leave. This'll take at least 2 hours." "I can't do 2 hours." Victoria's expression hardened into something brown. David recognized the CEO who didn't accept limitations. "David, this is a $50 million deal. I need you." And there it was, the impossible choice. Sophie or work, daughter or boss, personal or professional. David made the calculation he'd been making for 3 years. He stayed. The call ran until 3:45. By the time David escaped, Sophie's concert had been over for 90 minutes. He drove to the school anyway, knowing he was too late, but unable to not try. Mrs. Rodriguez met him in the hallway with sympathy written across her face. "Mr. Mitchell," Sophie was so disappointed. His stomach turned to lead. "Where is she?" "After-school program. She was pretty upset, so we let her bring Mr. Hoppy, even though it's usually against the rules." David found his daughter sitting alone in the corner of the multi-purpose room, clutching her rabbit, her face blotchy from crying that had exhausted itself into hollow staring. "Bug." Sophie looked up. Her expression devastated, betrayed hopeless hit like a fist to the solar plexus. "You promised. You crossed your heart and promised you'd be there." "I know. I'm so sorry. Work got busy and—" "You're always busy, just like Mommy was." The comparison detonated something in David's chest. He knelt in front of Sophie, trying to find words that would repair this and knowing nothing would. "That's not fair, Bug. Your mother left by choice. I had to work. It's different." "Is it?" Sophie's eyes. Sarah's eyes held accusation and grief in equal measure. "You chose work over me, just like she did." "Sophie, I don't want to talk to you." She turned away, pressing her face into Mr. Hoppy's worn fur. David sat with her for 20 minutes trying to apologize, trying to explain. But Sophie remained silent and furious, and eventually David had to accept that he'd broken something that wouldn't heal with words alone. They drove home in silence. Sophie refused dinner, refused bath time, Finally agreed to pajamas only after David promised to leave her alone. At 8, David sat on his couch and pulled up Google on his phone. How to apologize to a child you've disappointed. The results weren't encouraging. His phone buzzed. Victoria Tokyo deal secured. Thank you for staying. You saved us $50 million today. David stared at the message. $50 million. More money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. All because he'd chosen work over his daughter's recorder solo. He typed back, I miss Sophie's concert. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. What? She had a spring concert at 2 p.m. I was supposed to be there. I chose the Tokyo call instead. David, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed me. And I've spent 3 years making sure you never have to choose between me and something else. I guess I forgot. Sophie deserves the same consideration. Where are you, home? Sophie won't talk to me. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I'm already in my car. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a bag from the fancy toy store downtown. Her face showed genuine distress, all CEO armor, stripped away. You didn't have to bring anything. I didn't know what else to do. This is my fault. I should have asked why you could only give me 30 minutes. David led her inside. The house felt different tonight, the usual warmth replaced by Sophie's closed bedroom door, radiating hurt like a furnace. It's not your fault. I'm her father. I made the choice. Victoria set the bag down. Can I talk to her? She won't even talk to me. Let me try. David watched Victoria climb the stairs and disappear into Sophie's room. He sat on the couch, straining to hear the conversation. Victoria's voice too quiet to make out words. Sophie's voice angry and hurt. More quiet talking. Then crying, but different this time. Not angry tears, sad ones. Victoria emerged 30 minutes later and sat beside David on the couch. She's going to be okay, but she's hurting. What did you say to her? The truth, that you made a mistake, that adults make mistakes, sometimes even when they love their kids more than anything, that you're human and fallible and trying your best in an impossible situation. Victoria looked at David. I also told her it was my fault, that I asked you to stay without thinking about what you might be sacrificing, that I've been so focused on my own needs for connection, for family, for something real, that I didn't consider the cost to you and Sophie. Victoria, no, let me finish. I've been selfish. Coming here every morning, inserting myself into your lives, treating this like I could just visit this world without affecting it. But I am affecting it. Sophie's getting attached to me. You're getting pulled in 2 directions. And I created the work environment that makes you feel like you can't say no to me. She stood. I need to step back, give you space, let you focus on Sophie without me complicating things. David felt cold flood his chest. Is this you leaving? This is me recognizing that I'm making your life harder, not easier. What if I don't want space? Victoria's expression carried pain that looked genuine. David, Sophie just compared you to her mother, the mother who abandoned her because you chose work, chose me over her concert. Do you understand how serious that is? I understand that I made a mistake, but the solution isn't you disappearing. Sophie's attached to you. If you leave now, that's 2 people abandoning her. I'm not abandoning, aren't you? You said you've been inserting yourself into our lives. Well, congratulations. You're in. Sophie draws pictures of you. She asks me every morning if you are coming. She wants you at her field trip next month. You're part of this now, Victoria. You don't get to leave just because it got complicated. Victoria looks stricken. I don't know how to do this, how to be what she needs, what you need. Neither do I. I'm figuring it out as I go, but I know that running away isn't the answer. They stood in the quiet living room, the distance between them feeling insurmountable and negligible simultaneously. What do you want from me? Victoria's voice was barely audible. What are we doing here? David thought about all the careful boundaries he'd maintained, all the walls he'd built. Thought about Jennifer's warning. Thought about Sophie upstairs crying because the 2 adults in her life had both chosen something else over her. I don't know, but I know I don't want you to leave. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Okay, I won't leave. But David, we need to set boundaries. At work and here. Because what happened today can't happen again. Agreed. When Sophie needs you, you leave. I don't care if the building is on fire. You leave. Victoria. I mean it. You're right that I created a culture where you felt you couldn't say no. So I'm changing that. Starting now. Family first. Always. David felt something unclench in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is the bare minimum of being a decent human being. I just forgot how, somewhere along the way. Victoria moved toward the door, then stopped. David, for what it's worth, I think you're an incredible father. This mistake doesn't change that. After she left, David went upstairs to Sophie's room. She was still awake, staring at the ceiling. Bug? Victoria said you love me more than anything. David sat on the edge of her bed. I do. Then why did you leave me? Because I made a bad choice. I thought work was more important than your concert, and I was wrong. So wrong, Bug, and I'm sorry. Sophie was quiet. Then Victoria said she made you stay, that she didn't know about my concert. That's true, but I still should have told her. Should have left anyway. Are you going to leave me for work again? The question broke David's heart. No, never. If I have to choose between work and you, I'll choose you every single time from now on. I promise, Brian. Cross your heart, cross my heart, and hope to die. Sophie turned to look at him. I don't want you to die, Daddy. I'm not going anywhere, Bug. I'm staying right here. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sophie asked the question that terrified David most. Is Victoria staying too? Do you want her to? Yes, she's nice, and she knows about rocks, and she makes you smile. You don't smile enough, Daddy. David stroked Sophie's hair until she fell asleep, then went downstairs and sat in the dark living room trying to make sense of the day. He'd broken his daughter's trust, nearly destroyed the fragile thing building between him and Victoria. Learned that choosing between his two lives was impossible because they weren't separate anymore. His phone buzzed. Victoria, I meant what I said. Family first, starting with the company announcement Monday. David, what announcement, Victoria? You'll see. Get some sleep. And David, thank you for calling me out. I needed it. David set down his phone and tried to sleep, but his brain wouldn't cooperate. The weekend stretched ahead and Monday would bring whatever Victoria had planned, and David had the uncomfortable feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict or control. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Diane Harper, Sophie's maternal grandmother, was scheduled to visit at 2. David had been dreading this for weeks. Diane's visits were inspections disguised as family time cataloging every way David fell short of her impossible standards. But Victoria showed up at 8 anyway, carrying the groceries and determination. I thought you weren't coming. I changed my mind. You're stressed. I can see it in your emails. You've been working at midnight all week. So I'm making breakfast. You're going to eat it, and then you're going to tell me what you're afraid of. David let her in because arguing with Victoria when she'd made up her mind was futile. They cooked together while Sophie slept, and in the quiet kitchen, David found himself talking about Diane, about Sarah leaving, about blame and insufficient income and the constant fear of not being enough. Diane thinks if I'd been a better husband, Sarah would have stayed. That's not how it works. Isn't it Sarah left because being a mother was too hard, because our life wasn't exciting enough, because I wasn't enough? Victoria set down the spatula. Sarah left because Sarah made a choice. That's not on you. Diane doesn't see it that way, and today she's going to walk through this house and document every failure. The car that's falling apart, the too small space, every piece of evidence that Sophie deserves better than what I can provide. Victoria's voice went fierce. You're raising a remarkable child alone. You're working a demanding job while being present for every school event, every bedtime story, every crisis. You're doing the impossible, David. And if Diane can't see that, that's her failing, not yours. The words settled into David's chest like warmth. Thank you. I'm going to be here when she arrives. Victoria, no, that'll just complicate things. Good, let it be complicated. You've been handling this alone for 3 years. You don't have to anymore. Diane Harper arrived at exactly 2 punctual as a Swiss watch. She was 64 but looked 50, dressed in expensive business casual, her silver hair cut with precision that suggested high-end salons. She'd been a corporate attorney before retiring, and still carried herself like someone who cross-examined people for sport. Her eyes swept over David's house with familiar assessment cataloging worn furniture and crayon marks. Then her gaze landed on Victoria and confusion replaced criticism. "I wasn't aware you had company." "This is Victoria Cross, David hesitated, searching for accurate terminology. "I work with David." Victoria extended her hand with professional smoothness. "CEOs of Cross-Tech Solutions." Diane's eyes widened, fractionally recognition flickering across her face. "I see. I was hoping to speak with David privately." "Of course, I was just leaving." "No," David's voice came firm. "Actually, please stay." Victoria looked at him, understanding, passing between them. "Stay. Help me. Don't leave me to face this alone. If David wants me here, I'll stay." Diane's lips thinned, but she sat in the armchair that was showing wear on the arms. Sophie emerged from her room and saw her grandmother and offered a polite hug that lacked the enthusiasm she showed Victoria. "Hello, Sophie. You've grown." "I'm 6 now, almost 6.5. "How lovely." Diane's attention was already shifting back to David. "Sophie, why don't you go play in your room? The adults need to talk." "Can I stay with Victoria?" "Sophie." David kept his voice gentle. "Upstairs, bug, just for a little while." After Sophie disappeared, silence settled heavy. Diane studied Victoria with sharp attorney's eyes. "Ms. Cross, I appreciate your support of David, but this really is a family matter." "Then I'll stay, because I consider David and Sophie family." Diane's eyebrows climbed. "Family? You've known them how long?" 3 weeks, but time isn't the only measure of connection. 3 weeks and you're making declarations of family. How impulsive." "Diane," David's voice cut through the tension, "what did you want to talk about?" Diane leaned back, her gaze sharp. "I've been thinking about Sophie's future, about what's best for her. My husband and I have a large house in Laurelhurst, excellent schools, resources. We could provide opportunities you simply can't afford on an assistant's salary." David's blood ran cold. "We're fine. Are you?" Diane gestured around the small living room. "This house is too small. Your car is falling apart. Sophie's wearing clothes from Target." "There's nothing wrong with Target." Victoria's voice stayed calm. Diane ignored her. "David, I'm not saying you're a bad father, but you're stretched too thin. Working full-time, raising her alone, barely making ends meet. Sophie deserves more than barely. She deserves to be with her father." "Does she, or are you holding on because you're afraid to admit you can't do this?" The words hit like acid because David had thought them himself late at night when bills piled up and Sophie asked why they couldn't afford things her classmates had. "I can do this." "Can you?" Diane leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're drowning. And pride is a poor substitute for stability." Victoria stood with sudden grace. Her movement was deliberate enough that both David and Diane looked at her in surprise. "Mrs. Harper, I understand your concern for Sophie, but let me be very clear. David Mitchell is the most capable, dedicated parent I've ever encountered. He shows up for every school event. He makes breakfast from scratch because Sophie won't eat it otherwise. He braids her hair and helps with homework and has created a home full of love despite working a demanding job." Diane opened her mouth to respond, but Victoria continued, her voice carrying a boardroom authority. "As of last Monday, David received a significant raise in housing allowance. His compensation now reflects his value to our company, which is considerable. So your concerns about financial instability are outdated." "How convenient. A raise right when I visit." Diane's voice went cold. "Tell me, Ms. Cross, what exactly is your relationship with David? Because this looks less like professional support and more like something else entirely." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "My relationship with David is none of your business. But I'll tell you this, I care about him and Sophie deeply. And if you pursue custody, you won't be fighting just David. You'll be fighting me, my resources, my lawyers, every advantage I can bring to bear." "You can't buy a custody case." "No, but I can ensure David has every advantage. And I will." Diane turned to David. "You're letting her fight your battles." "No, I'm accepting help, which is something I should have done a long time ago." Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, her expression crumpled. The attorney mask slipped, and underneath was just a woman who looked tired and feeling old. I failed Sarah. I pushed her too hard, expected too much, made her think love was something you earned through achievement. And when motherhood got difficult, she didn't know how to ask for help. She just ran. Diane's voice broke. I see Sarah in Sophie. Every time I visit, I see my daughter at that age. And I'm terrified I'll lose Sophie too. That one day she'll leave and it'll be my fault again because I didn't do enough. The confession landed like a grenade. David had never heard Diane acknowledge her role in Sarah's leaving. Victoria's voice went gentle. Then don't push them away. Be the grandmother Sophie needs, not the judge David fears. Diane looked at Victoria with something approaching respect. You're very direct. I've been told, usually as a criticism. I appreciate directness. Diane took a breath. David, I'm not here to take Sophie. I'm here because I'm afraid of losing her, of being shut out, of making the same mistakes I made with Sarah. Then don't make them. Visit because you want to see Sophie, not because you're evaluating me. Ask how you can help instead of criticizing. Be her grandmother, not a prosecutor. Diane's voice went small. I don't know how to do that. I wasn't raised with warmth. Neither was I. Victoria's admission was quiet, but we can learn. Together. Something passed between the two women, recognition maybe, or understanding. Two people raised in emotional austerity, finally confronting the cost. Diane stood. I think I've caused enough drama for one day. Sophie, you can come down now. Sophie appeared so quickly, she must have been listening from the stairs. Are you staying for dinner, Grandma? Diane looked surprised. Would you like me to? Yes, and Victoria too. We can all eat together like a family. That sounds lovely. They did eat together spaghetti again because David's repertoire remained limited. But this time there was laughter. Diane asked Sophie about school and actually listened. Victoria and Diane discovered they'd attended the same law school 20 years apart and bonded over complaints about a notoriously difficult contracts professor. Sophie narrated her rock collection's expansion plans, while the adults traded stories and the evening settled into something resembling peace. After Diane left, promising to visit again next month and call beforehand, this time David and Victoria stood at the door watching taillights disappear. Thank you for staying, for standing up for me. Thank you for letting me. Victoria turned to face him. David, I need to tell you something. Okay. I'm in love with you. The words detonated the quiet evening. David stared at Victoria, his brain struggling to process what she just said. You're what? In love with you? With Sophie? With this life you've built? I've been trying to convince myself it's loneliness or curiosity about a world I've never experienced. But it's not. It's love. Victoria's voice stayed steady despite the vulnerability bleeding through. And I know that's terrifying. I know the power dynamic is complicated. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I can't keep pretending this is casual. It's not. Not for me. David felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Victoria, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know because I'm done hiding, done pretending I'm just visiting this world. I want to be part of it, part of your family, if you'll have me. David thought about all the reasons this was dangerous. The power imbalance, the risk to his job, Sophie's attachment, the possibility of heartbreak. Then he thought about Victoria reading bedtime stories, attempting pancakes, standing up to Diane with fierce protectiveness, looking at Sophie like she was something miraculous. I love you too. God help me, I love you too. Victoria's face transformed, surprise, joy, relief crashing together. Really, really, and it terrifies me, because you could destroy my life without even trying. I won't. I promise, David, I won't hurt you or Sophie. I'll spend every day proving that you can trust me. David pulled her close and they stood in his doorway holding each other, while the Seattle evening settled around them with the weight of promises made and futures imagined. From upstairs, Sophie's voice carried down, Are you guys kissing? Because in my stories, when people say they love each other, they kiss. Victoria laughed against David's shoulder. Your daughter is extremely perceptive. Tell me about it. Should we kiss then, since we apparently have an audience? David cupped Victoria's face gently. Yeah, I think we should. The kiss was soft and careful and felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling with none of her usual guardedness. I'm keeping that drawing Sophie made, the one of us holding hands, framing it, putting it on my desk at work. That'll start rumors. Good, let them talk. I'm done hiding too. They went upstairs to say goodnight to Sophie, who bounced on her bed with excitement barely contained by physics. You kissed. Does this mean Victoria is staying forever? Do you want me to? Victoria's voice carried genuine uncertainty. Yes, forever and ever. Victoria looked at David over Sophie's head. Forever sounds about right. After Sophie fell asleep, David and Victoria sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, both quiet in comfortable silence. Monday, I'm making the announcement. Company-wide policy changes. Flexible scheduling, family leave, all of it. The board won't like it. The board can learn to deal with it. Victoria lifted her head to look at him. I'm choosing differently now, David. Choosing people over profit. Choosing you and Sophie over corporate perfection. And I'm not backing down. David kissed her forehead. You're going to change the world. No, I'm going to change one company and hope that's enough to make a difference. They sat together planning futures and believing in possibilities, and for the first time in 3 years, David felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Monday morning arrived with the electric anticipation of storms gathering on distant horizons. David woke at 5 to find Victoria already in his kitchen, wearing one of his old t-shirts and her jeans from yesterday, making coffee with the focused intensity she brought to hostile acquisitions. You stayed. His voice came rough with sleep. You asked me to, last night, after Sophie fell asleep. Victoria turned and her expression held vulnerability that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Was that okay? More than okay, and they'd spent the night on the couch talking until 3 a.m., mapping futures and dismantling fears, Victoria eventually falling asleep against his shoulder, while David stared at the ceiling, wondering if happiness this acute could possibly last. He'd carried her to his bed the first time she'd been in his room and taken the couch himself because some boundaries still felt important, even as others dissolved. Sophie appeared at 6:15, saw Victoria making pancakes, and accepted this development with the easy adaptability of someone who'd decided the universe was finally cooperating with their plans. Is Victoria living here now? Not yet, Bug, but she's staying for breakfast. Can she stay forever? David met Victoria's eyes across the kitchen. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement that forever was a concept they were both terrified of and desperately wanted. We'll see. Sophie's face fell. It means maybe, genuinely maybe, we're figuring things out. At work, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Word had spread that Victoria was making a major announcement at the 10 a.m. all-hands meeting. Speculation ranged from layoffs to acquisitions, to Victoria finally revealing she was actually an advanced AI and Crosstech had been a Turing test all along. Jennifer cornered David at 9:30. What's she announcing? You'll find out with everyone else. David, I've worked here 5 years. Victoria doesn't do all-hands meetings unless someone's getting fired or the company's being sold. Which is it? Neither, just wait. At 9:55, employees packed into the main conference hall, 200 people who'd been summoned via urgent email. Victoria stood at the podium in her armor suit hair, severe every inch the CEO who'd built an empire. But David saw the tremor in her hands before she gripped the lectern. Thank you for coming on short notice. I have an announcement that will fundamentally change how Crosstech operates. Silence descended heavy with anxiety. 3 weeks ago, I met someone who showed me that I've been running this company wrong for 10 years. Victoria's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. We've built a culture that demands total dedication, that measures worth by hours worked and sacrifices made, that treats personal lives as inefficiencies to be minimized. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I created an environment where single parents hide their children, where people with disabilities lie about medical appointments, where having a life outside these walls is seen as weakness. Victoria's gaze swept the room. That ends today. She clicked to the first slide, choosing people first, a cultural transformation. Effective immediately. Crosstech is implementing comprehensive family-friendly policies, flexible scheduling, remote work options, 12 weeks paid parental leave for all parents, not just mothers, subsidized childcare, emergency family leave, mental health support programs. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Jennifer was openly crying 2 rows ahead. Some of you know I'm in a relationship with my assistant, David Mitchell. Victoria's voice cut through the noise. Some see this as scandal. I see it as the catalyst for necessary change. David has a 6-year-old daughter he's been hiding for 3 years because our culture made him feel that being human was incompatible with being valuable. David felt 200 pairs of eyes turned toward him. His face burned, but Victoria's gaze held him steady. I was wrong. We were wrong. And starting today, we're doing this differently. Victoria's voice went fierce. Family first, always. If your child needs you, you leave. If you have a medical appointment, you go. If you need mental health support, you take it. No questions, no penalties, no judgment. The presentation continued detailed policies, implementation timelines, support structures. But David barely heard it over the pounding of his heart. Victoria had just publicly claimed their relationship acknowledged Sophie and restructured the entire company culture. There was no going back now. After the meeting, employees surrounded David. Jennifer hugged him so hard his ribs creaked. James from marketing, sober for once, shook his hand with tears streaming. A woman David barely knew grabbed his arm and whispered that she had a son with autism. She'd been hiding for 18 months. And could she finally put his picture on her desk? Yes, of course you can. Victoria emerged from the crowd and found David's eyes. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement of the line they just crossed together. That evening, Victoria came to dinner carrying Thai food instead of groceries, having finally accepted that her cooking skills remained catastrophic despite persistent effort. Sophie chattered about her day while David and Victoria traded glances, weighted with everything they hadn't said yet. After Sophie went to bed, they sat on the couch in the configuration that had become theirs, close, but not touching, coffee mugs in hand, the house settling into quiet around them. The board is furious, Victoria's voice carried exhaustion. Richard Chen called an emergency session for Wednesday. He's pushing for a no-confidence vote. David's stomach clenched. Because of the policy changes. Because of you. Because I publicly acknowledged our relationship. Because revenue is down 8% and he's blaming my sudden humanity for making the company soft. Victoria, if you lose the CEO position because of me, I won't. And even if I did, I'd still have you and Sophie. That's worth more than any corporate title. The words settled into David's chest like warmth. I love you. I love you too. Which is why I need to tell you something you are not going to like. David's pulse quickened. Okay. I've been researching foster care certification. Classes, home studies, background checks. The whole process. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. I want to adopt. I want to give a child what I never had, what you've given Sophie, a home where love isn't conditional. That's incredible. I haven't told you the complicated part yet. Victoria met his eyes. The process takes months, maybe a year, and it's going to be hard. There will be setbacks and rejections and children who've been through trauma I can't fix with money or determination. I know, but you're not doing it alone. We'll figure it out together. Victoria's expression shifted to something David couldn't quite read. You'd do that? Help me through this, even though we've only been together 3 weeks? 3 weeks or 3 years, doesn't matter. We're in this now, all of it. The kiss that followed tasted like promises and coffee and the particular sweetness of two people who'd spent their lives alone, finally finding home in each other. The next morning, Victoria showed up at 6:30 with printouts about foster care requirements and a determination that bordered on manic. She'd barely slept. David could see it in the shadows under her eyes, but her focus was laser precise as she walked him through her research. I've signed up for the orientation class next Saturday. It's 8 hours. I know you have Sophie, but I was hoping I'll come with you. We'll bring Sophie. Make it a family thing. Victoria's face did something complicated. You keep saying that, family, like it's already decided. Isn't it? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully voiced. They'd said, I love you. They'd gone public. But claiming family meant permanence, meant futures built together instead of adjacent. Victoria's voice came quiet. I want it to be, but David, I'm 42. I've never been in a serious relationship. I don't know how to do this. What if I mess it up? Then we fix it. Together? That's how this works. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, saw them having a serious conversation, and immediately inserted herself into the middle. Are you guys getting married? Emma Chen says when grown-ups have serious talks, it means they're getting married. Bug, it's too early for that question. Is it though? Victoria's voice carried something David couldn't identify. Maybe Emma Chen is onto something. David's heart stopped. Are you not proposing, not yet, but thinking about futures where that's possible? Victoria looked at Sophie. Would you like that if I became part of your family officially? Sophie's response was to throw herself at Victoria with enough force to nearly knock them both over. Yes, yes, yes. Then I'd have a mommy again, and we could all live together, and you could teach me more about rocks and business and everything. Over Sophie's head, Victoria mouthed to David, too fast. He mouthed back, perfect speed. The foster care orientation happened on Saturday in a community center that smelled like old coffee and institutional cleaning products. David and Victoria sat in folding chairs while a social worker named Patricia Chen, no relation to Emma, will walk them through the realities of fostering traumatized children. Sophie sat in the corner with coloring books, occasionally looking up to observe the proceedings with the focused attention of someone gathering intelligence. Foster care isn't about saving children. Patricia's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much. It's about providing stability while the system determines what's best for them. Sometimes that means reunification with biological parents. Sometimes it means adoption. Sometimes it means watching a child you've bonded with leave your home and never knowing if they'll be okay. Victoria's hand found David's and gripped hard. The children who end up in foster care have experienced trauma, abuse, and neglect abandonment. They'll test you, push boundaries. Some will rage, some will withdraw, some will seem fine until they're not. Patricia's gaze swept the room of prospective foster parents. You need to be prepared for that, for loving a child who might not love you back, for giving everything and getting rejection, for doing the hardest thing you've ever done with no guarantee of success. After the orientation, they sat in David's car while Sophie napped in the back seat. Victoria stared straight ahead, her face pale. That was terrifying. Yeah, what if I can't do it? What if I'm too broken from my own childhood to help a broken child? David turned to face her. You're not broken, you're learning, and you won't be doing it alone. You'd really help me with this. Take on someone else's traumatized child when you're barely managing your own life. My life isn't barely managed anymore. You fix that. David took her hand, and yes, I'd help, because that's what family does. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, I filled out the application for certification. Used your address as my residence because I'm basically living there anyway, and the apartment I'm selling doesn't qualify as child appropriate. Is that okay? More than okay, move in officially. Stop pretending you're going to go back to your penthouse. I haven't stayed there in 2 weeks. Exactly. So move in. Be part of this, all the way. Victoria's smile was tremulous but genuine. Okay, I'll start packing tomorrow. The board meeting on Wednesday arrived with all the subtlety of an execution. David wasn't invited, assistants didn't attend board meetings, but Victoria texted him updates every 30 minutes like a soldier sending dispatches from a war zone. 10:30. Richard's opening with quarterly revenue projections, down 8%, blaming policy changes. 11:00, Susan from finance backing him up, says we're losing competitive edge. 11:30, vote of no confidence proposed. Need majority to survive. David stared at his phone, anxiety churning. If Victoria lost the CEO position, she'd lose everything she'd built. And it would be his fault, because she'd chosen him and Sophie over corporate perfection. 12:15. Jennifer just walked in. She has documents. Richard's face is purple. David's pulse quickened. Jennifer? The financial discrepancies she'd shown him last week. The offshore transfers with Richard's approval codes. 12:45, holy shit. Jennifer found evidence Richard knew about the CFO embezzling $2 million last year and covered it up. He's out. I'm staying. David's exhale could have inflated a balloon. He texted back, "You're incredible. Victoria, I'm terrified and relieved in equal measure. New board members being appointed. This is going to change everything." That night, Victoria came home. David noticed a shift in language. She had stopped saying David's house and started saying home, carrying Thai food again, and looking like she'd aged 10 years in 8 hours. Sophie took one look at her and declared, "You need a hug." Victoria knelt down and Sophie wrapped her arms around her neck with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd decided this person was hers now and required defending. "Thank you, sweetheart. Did you have a bad day at work?" "A hard day, but it ended okay." Over dinner, Victoria explained about Richard's removal, the board restructuring, the narrow escape from losing everything. David listened and felt guilt mixed with relief in toxic proportions. "This is my fault. You almost lost the company because of me." "No, I almost lost the company because I'd built it on a foundation of inhumanity, and someone finally called me on it." Victoria reached across the table for his hand. "Richard was corrupt. The old board enabled it. If this hadn't happened, we'd have kept going until something worse exploded. You didn't cause this. You revealed problems that already existed." Sophie, picking up on the tension, asked the question David had been avoiding. "Are we going to be poor now?" Victoria's expression softened. "No, sweetheart. We're going to be fine. Better than fine." "But Daddy said you were in trouble at work." "I was. But sometimes trouble is how we find out who we really are. And I found out I'd rather have you and your dad than any amount of corporate success." The simple honesty of it made David's chest ache. This woman who'd built an empire was choosing them over everything she'd spent 42 years constructing. The weight of that choice felt crushing and miraculous simultaneously. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Victoria moved in officially, her designer furniture looking absurd next to David's secondhand couch, but somehow working anyway. Sophie adjusted with the easy acceptance of someone who'd been waiting for this configuration all along. The foster care certification process consumed them. Background checks, home studies, reference interviews. A social worker named Amanda Martinez visited twice, walking through their house with clipboard and questions that felt invasive but necessary. "You're an unusual case." Amanda's voice was neutral but not unkind. "Newly cohabiting couple, one with no parenting experience, applying for what's likely to be a high-needs placement. Most people start with respite care. We don't want to start small." Victoria's voice carried the determination that had built Crosstech. "We want to help a child who needs stability, even if it's hard." Amanda studied them for a long moment. "I'm going to be honest. The kids who've been in the system longest, the ones who've been through multiple placements, they're the hardest. Reactive attachment disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, trauma responses that can look like manipulation or rage. You'll question everything. Your relationship, your capacity, your sanity. We understand. Do you? Because loving someone else's traumatized child is different from loving your biological kid. There's no genetic bond compelling you to stay when it gets hard, and it will get hard." David thought about Sophie, about the 3 years he'd spent barely surviving, about the nights he'd questioned everything. Hard doesn't scare us anymore. 3 months after Victoria's announcement, Crosstech's culture had shifted visibly. Parents brought kids to the office on sick days. People left at reasonable hours. The break room featured a bulletin board covered in family photos, children with disabilities, elderly parents needing care, chosen families of every configuration. Jennifer approached David one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "Lily started wheelchair basketball. With the company childcare stipend, we could afford the equipment and league fees. She's thriving, David, and it's because Victoria had the guts to blow everything up." The words settled into David's chest like vindication. This was why Victoria had risked her position, not for him specifically, but for everyone who'd been hiding their humanity to survive corporate culture. But not everyone was grateful. At 4 months, the backlash arrived in the form of 2 major clients terminating their contracts, citing Crosstech's shift in priorities as incompatible with their needs. The revenue hit was significant, $15 million over 2 quarters. Victoria came home that night looking shaken. "The new board is nervous. They're asking if the culture changes are sustainable. What did you tell them? That people matter more than profit. That we're building something better even if it costs us in the short term. She collapsed onto the couch. But David, what if I'm wrong? What if I destroyed a successful company chasing some idealistic vision that doesn't work in reality? David sat beside her, pulling her close. You're not wrong. Change takes time. The right clients will come. The ones who value humanity alongside productivity. And if they don't, then we figure it out. Together. Sophie emerged from her room wearing her pajamas, even though it was only 6:30. She climbed into Victoria's lap with the confidence of someone who knew she'd be welcomed. You look sad. Just worried about work, sweetheart. Daddy says worrying is borrowing trouble from tomorrow. You should just fix today's problems and let tomorrow worry about itself. Victoria laughed despite everything. Your father is very wise. I know, that's why I keep him. At 5 months, Amanda called with news. We have a placement, 8-year-old boy named Tyler. He's been in foster care for 3 years, 4 different homes. Last family returned him after 6 months citing behavioral issues. David felt Victoria tense beside him. What kind of behavioral issues? Reactive attachment disorder. Difficulty with authority. Some aggression when he feels threatened. He's been through trauma that would break most adults. Amanda's voice softened. He needs a home that won't give up on him. I think you might be that home, but I need you to understand this won't be easy. When can we meet him? They met Tyler at the foster agency office on a Tuesday afternoon. He was small for 8 with dark eyes that looked ancient and a guardedness that radiated like heat. He sat in a chair, examining them with the expression of someone cataloging exits. Sophie, who'd insisted on coming, approached him with her rock collection. Hi, I'm Sophie. Do you like rocks? Tyler's response was silence so complete it felt aggressive. Sophie tried again. This one is from the hospital where I was born, and this one is from the beach where my daddy proposed to my first mommy even though she's not here anymore. Still nothing. Patricia Chen, supervising the meeting, intervened gently. Tyler has a hard time trusting new people. It might take him a while to warm up. That's okay. Victoria's voice was calm. We can wait. They spent an hour in that room, Sophie chattering about rocks, while Tyler remained silent, David and Victoria offering gentle questions that went unanswered. By the end, David was exhausted and questioning everything. In the car afterward, Sophie asked, why won't he talk? He's scared bug. When people hurt you a lot, you stop trusting anyone. Will he trust us eventually? Victoria's voice came from the passenger seat, quiet and determined. We're going to make sure he can. Tyler came home on a Friday. They'd prepared his room, the small one that had been David's office, with neutral colors and minimal decoration, because Amanda warned that too much too fast could overwhelm. Tyler arrived carrying a garbage bag of belongings and that same guarded expression. This is your room. David opened the door. You can decorate it however you want. Change anything. It's yours. Tyler walked in, set down his bag, and said nothing. We're having spaghetti for dinner. It'll be ready in an hour if you want to come down. Tyler closed the door in their faces. Sophie looked up at David with worried eyes. Is he okay? He's adjusting. Give him space. At dinner, Tyler didn't appear. David knocked on his door at 7. Food's ready if you're hungry. Silence. I'm leaving a plate outside your door. Eat when you want. The plate was still there at 9, untouched. Victoria found David staring at it with an expression that mixed concern and helplessness. Should we be worried? Amanda said he'd test boundaries. Refusing food is common. How long do we wait before intervening? I don't know. That night, David woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of something breaking. He ran to Tyler's room and found the boy standing in the middle of the floor, surrounded by shattered ceramic, Sophie's favorite mug, the one with butterflies now destroyed. Tyler's face showed no remorse. I didn't want it in here. David's heart pounded, but he kept his voice level. Okay, that's okay. We can clean it up. I don't want to be here. I want to go back to the group home. You're staying here. This is your home now. You'll send me back. Everyone does. We won't, even when you break things or push us away or test every boundary. We're staying. Tyler's expression cracked for just a moment, something that looked like hope trying to break through armor before he shuddered it away. You're lying. You'll get tired of me and send me back like everyone else. Victoria appeared in the doorway, woken by the commotion. She assessed the situation instantly, shattered ceramic defiant child David's exhausted determination. Tyler, her voice carried the certainty of someone making a contract. I don't lie, ever. And I'm telling you right now, we're not sending you back. You can break every dish in this house, and we'll buy new ones. You can rage and test and push, and we'll still be here. Because you're ours now, and we keep what's ours. Something shifted in Tyler's face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust somewhere down the road. The first week was hell. Tyler refused to speak, threw food, punched the wall hard enough to leave holes. He screamed at night nightmares about things he wouldn't describe during daylight hours. He destroyed Sophie's rock collection in a fit of jealous rage, reducing months of careful curation to scattered debris. Sophie cried so hard she made herself sick. I hate him. Send him back. David held her while she sobbed, his own heart breaking. That's not how family works, Bug. He's not family. He's mean and scary, and I want him gone. Victoria sat beside them, her voice gentle but firm. Sophie, remember when you lost Mr. Hoppy at the hotel? How scared and sad you were. Yes. Tyler lost it for everything. His parents, his safety, his ability to trust anyone. Breaking your rocks was wrong, but it came from hurt, not meanness. He needs us to show him that love doesn't depend on being perfect. Sophie's resistance crumbled into understanding. Can we get new rocks together, me and Tyler? That's a beautiful idea. The next morning, Sophie knocked on Tyler's door with a box of rocks she'd collected from the backyard. I want to show you about igneous formations, if you want to learn. Tyler opened the door a crack. Why? Because you broke my collection and you probably feel bad about it, even though you won't say so, and Daddy says forgiveness means giving people chances to be better. Something in Tyler's face shifted. I do feel bad about the rocks and the mug. Then let's start over. Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm 6 3/4, and I really like rocks. Tyler's response was barely audible. I'm Tyler. I'm 8. I don't know anything about rocks. That's okay, I can teach you. David watched from the hallway as his daughter extended grace to someone who'd hurt her and felt pride so acute it hurt to breathe. This was what Victoria had been talking about, choosing love over convenience, people over perfection. The second week was marginally better. Tyler started eating meals with them, though he remained silent. He let Sophie show him rocks and listened with what might have been interest. He stopped breaking things, though his nightmares continued unabated. Victoria handled it with surprising competence, showing up at 2 a.m. when Tyler screamed, sitting outside his door until he calmed, never pushing but always present. David watched her transform from someone who'd never parented to someone who understood that love sometimes meant just bearing witness to pain you couldn't fix. At 3 weeks, Tyler spoke his first full sentence at dinner. Can I have more spaghetti? Sophie dropped her fork in shock. Victoria's eyes went bright with tears. David's voice came out rough. Of course, buddy, as much as you want. After dinner, Tyler lingered in the kitchen while David cleaned up. Why are you being nice to me? Because you're part of our family now. But I broke Sophie's rocks and the mug, and I've been terrible. David turned to face him directly. Tyler, do you know what unconditional means? No. Well, it means no matter what. We love you no matter what. You could break every dish in this house, and we'd still love you. You could rage and scream and push us away, and we'd still love you. Because that's what family means. Staying even when it's hard. Tyler's face did something complicated, disbelief warring with desperate hope. Nobody's ever said that before. About me. Then they were wrong, and we're going to spend every day proving it. That night, Tyler had his worst nightmare yet. David heard him screaming and ran, found the boy thrashing and crying, trapped in whatever horror his brain was replaying. Victoria was already there, sitting on the edge of his bed, not touching, but present. Tyler, you're safe. You're home. Nobody's hurting you. Tyler woke with a cape, his face wet with tears. He looked at Victoria with something approaching trust. I dreamed about my old house. Before foster care. When my dad used to... He stopped, unable to finish. You don't have to talk about it, But know that person can't hurt you anymore. We won't let anyone hurt you. Tyler's voice came small and broken. Promise. I promise. Cross my heart and hope to die. Something in Tyler fractured. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around Victoria's neck, sobbing into her shoulder with the abandon of someone who'd been holding grief inside too long. Victoria froze for a heartbeat. David recognized the panic of someone unused to being needed. Then her arms came up and held Tyler while he cried. I've got you, baby. I've got you. From the doorway, David watched the woman he loved become a mother in real time and felt something in his chest expand until he thought his ribs might crack from the pressure. The fourth week brought breakthrough. Tyler started calling David and Victoria by their names instead of silence. He helped Sophie with her homework, showing unexpected aptitude for math. He laughed once at dinner when Sophie told a joke so bad it caused physical pain. He asked tentatively if he could put his drawing on the refrigerator, a stick figure family with 4 people instead of 3. Victoria stared at that drawing for 5 full minutes, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course you can. At 6 weeks, Tyler called Victoria Mom for the first time. It slipped out accidentally during breakfast. Mom, can you pass the juice? And then he froze, realizing what he'd said. Victoria's hand trembled as she passed the juice. You can call me Mom if you want to, if you're ready. Is it okay? Even though you're not my real mom, I'm as real as you need me to be. And if you want me to be your mom, then that's what I am. Tyler's response was quiet but certain. Okay, Mom. David watched Sophie beam across the table, watched Victoria's careful composure dissolve into tears, watched Tyler look uncertain but hopeful. This patchwork family they'd built from broken pieces and stubborn love, it was real. Messier than any of them had imagined, harder than they'd prepared for, but real, in ways that mattered more than blood or biology. That weekend, they had their first family outing, the Pacific Science Center that Sophie had been advocating for since Tyler arrived. Tyler held Sophie's hand through the exhibits, both of them chattering about dinosaurs and space, and whether volcanoes counted as rocks or fire. Victoria walked beside David, her hand in his. We did it. Did what? Became a family, against all odds and common sense and every warning Amanda gave us. We actually did it. David pulled her close, kissed her temple. Yeah, we did. 3 months after Tyler arrived, the social worker visited for her quarterly check-in. Amanda walked through the house, interviewed Tyler privately, examined the family dynamic with professional detachment. Afterwards, she sat with David and Victoria in the living room while the kids played upstairs. I'm not supposed to show favoritism or make predictions, but Tyler is thriving in a way I've never seen. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Victoria's voice was quiet. We're just loving him. That's all. That's everything. Most people can't sustain that when a child fights them as hard as Tyler fought you. But you stayed, and he knows it. Amanda pulled out paperwork. I'm recommending approval for adoption proceedings, if that's what you want. David and Victoria looked at each other, entire conversations passing in the silence. Then Victoria spoke with absolute certainty. Yes, that's what we want. The adoption proceedings took 4 months, background checks and court dates and paperwork that seemed designed to test their commitment. Tyler attended therapy twice a week, working through trauma that would take years to fully process. But slowly, incrementally, he opened up. He told them about his biological parents, the abuse, the neglect, the reasons he'd learned to trust no one. He cried and raged and tested every boundary they set, and every time they stayed. Sophie became his fiercest defender, correcting anyone who suggested Tyler wasn't her real brother, with the indignation of someone personally offended by ignorance. Diane visited monthly. Now her relationship with David transformed from adversarial to supportive. She brought Tyler books about rocks, connecting with her grandson through Sophie's obsession, and slowly built trust with someone as guarded as she was. At work, Crosstech stabilized. The culture shift attracted clients who valued humanity alongside profit. Revenue recovered, then exceeded previous levels. The new board supported Victoria's vision, and the company became known as a tech leader in work-life integration. Jennifer was promoted to director of HR, tasked with implementing and protecting the new policies. She brought Lily to the office regularly, the girl's wheelchair decorated with stickers Sophie had helped select. The adoption finalization happened on a Tuesday in November. Judge Sarah Brennan, no relation to David's ex-wife, though the name made him tense, initially reviewed the case file with the thoroughness of someone who took children's welfare seriously. Tyler, do you want to be adopted by David Mitchell and Victoria Cross? Tyler's voice was clear and certain. Yes, they're my family. They chose me when nobody else would, and they kept choosing me even when I made it hard. The judge's eyes went suspiciously bright. That's a beautiful way to put it. Adoption is about choice, choosing to love someone regardless of biology. It sounds like you've all chosen each other. She signed the papers with ceremonial gravity. Tyler Mitchell Cross, congratulations. You're officially adopted. The name combination had been Tyler's idea, taking both their last names because he wanted to carry all of them with him. Sophie had immediately demanded the same, becoming Sophie Mitchell Cross in solidarity. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Victoria pulled Tyler into a fierce hug. You're mine now, legally, officially, forever. I was already yours. The paper just makes it official. They celebrated with ice cream, the fancy place downtown that Sophie had deemed acceptable for special occasions. Tyler got 3 scoops, Sophie got a banana split, and David and Victoria shared coffee while watching their children compete over who could eat fastest without getting brain freeze. We did it, Victoria's voice carried wonder. We actually built a family. You sound surprised. I spent 42 years convinced I was too broken for this. Too damaged from my own childhood to parent someone else's traumatized kid. And here we are. David laced his fingers through hers. Here we are. That night, after both kids were asleep, David found Victoria on the back porch of the house they'd bought 6 months ago. A real house with a yard where Sophie could display her rocks and Tyler could practice soccer. She was staring at the stars with an expression David had learned meant she was processing something big. What are you thinking about a marriage? Kids calling us mom and dad. The fact that I have a family now and I still can't quite believe it's real. David's heart rate kicked up. Is this you proposing? Would that be okay if I did? Victoria, I've been carrying a ring in my pocket for 2 months waiting for the right moment. So yeah, it would be very okay. She turned to face him fully. You have a ring. Had to sell some stock options to afford it, but yes, I have a ring. David pulled a small box from his jacket. I was going to wait until the adoption was finalized, make it a perfect moment. But there are no perfect moments, are there? Just real ones. He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band with a single diamond. Victoria Cross, will you marry me? Make this family official in every possible way. Victoria's laugh came out wet with tears. I was supposed to propose. I had a whole speech planned. You can still give it. David Mitchell, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Sophie and Tyler and this whole messy, beautiful life we've built. I want to spend forever figuring it out with you. She pulled her own ring box from her pocket. So, yes, I'll marry you, if you'll marry me. They stood on the porch exchanging rings and promises while the Seattle night settled around them. Somewhere inside, their children slept safely in a home built on choice and stubbornness and love that refused to quit. Sophie's going to be insufferable about this. David kissed Victoria's forehead. She's been planning our wedding since the second pancake breakfast. Tyler will probably want to help. He mentioned something about being ring bearer. We're getting married because our kids decided we should, aren't we? Completely, and I wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months later, they got married in the backyard of their house. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Sophie was flower girl, Tyler was ring bearer, and Diane officiated after getting ordained online specifically for this purpose. The vows were simple. David promised to show up to choose her every day, to love her through every crisis and triumph. Victoria promised the same, adding that she'd learned from him that family wasn't about biology or perfection, but about staying even when it was hard. Jennifer caught the bouquet. James from marketing cried through the entire ceremony. The new board members attended and toasted to the CEO who'd chosen humanity over profit and built something better. At the reception, Tyler pulled David and Victoria aside with the serious expression he wore when processing something important. I have something to tell you. What's up, buddy? The social worker called yesterday. There's another kid, 9-year-old girl, Maya. She's been in the system for 4 years and nobody wants her because she has behavioral issues. Tyler's voice was steady. I think we should meet her, see if we could help. David and Victoria looked at each other. Their house was full. Their lives were complicated. They were barely managing two kids and full-time jobs and the constant chaos of their existence. But looking at Tyler's face, this child who'd been unwanted and unloved and had somehow found the capacity to want to help someone else, David knew there was only one answer. Tell us more about her. Tyler's face lit up. She likes science and she's really good at math. The social worker thinks she'd do well with us because, he paused, searching for words, because we don't give up on people. Victoria knelt to Tyler's eye level. Are you sure about this? Another sibling means less attention for you and Sophie. I'm sure because someone chose me when I was the kid nobody wanted, and I want to give that to someone else. David felt his chest expand with pride, so acute it hurt. Then let's meet Maya. See if it's a fit. Victoria stood and took David's hand. Together. Always together. They rejoined the reception where Sophie was teaching Lily a complicated hand-clapping game, and Diane was deep in conversation with Jennifer about advocacy for children with disabilities. James from marketing was dancing with his boyfriend, the house filled with noise and laughter and the particular chaos of people who'd chosen each other. David stood on the porch watching his family, this patchwork constellation of people who'd found each other through accident and intention and stubborn refusal to give up, and felt gratitude so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. Victoria found him there and wrapped her arms around him from behind. What are you thinking about? How none of this was part of the plan. How I spent 3 years trying to keep my world separate, and the best thing that ever happened was them colliding. You know what I've learned? What? That there are no perfect families. No perfect moments. No perfect anything. Just imperfect people choosing each other every day. Choosing to stay when it's hard. Choosing love over convenience. David turned in her arms to face her. That's probably the most romantic thing you've ever said. I've gotten better at this. The human connection thing. You taught me that. We taught each other. They stood together watching their family, and David thought about Sarah's note. Those 4 words that had once felt like an ending. I can't do this, but they had. They'd done the impossible. Built a family from broken pieces, chosen each other every day, stayed when it was hard, and they'd keep choosing, keep staying, keep loving, forever and ever, just like Sophie said, because that's what family meant.